Hi everybody, my name is Amanda Raines and I am a 4-H educator in Hardin County, Ohio. Today I will be teaching you a lesson on keeping mental health in mind at camp. And this is going to fill your competency for the health, wellness, and risk management section of our camp competencies. So the first thing I want you to do is think about what your role is at camp. So we know that as a camp counselor, one of your biggest jobs is to keep campers healthy. And that includes their physical health, so making sure they're hydrated, making sure they put on sunscreen, that they're eating, all of those things that keep us physically healthy at camp. But it also includes their mental health and their emotional health. So we're going to kind of think a little bit more about the second two during this lesson. And we want you to realize that, yes, physical safety is very important, but it also falls under your umbrella and your job to keep campers mentally and emotionally healthy as well. So what is mental health exactly? It's any time that something affects our ability to live, laugh, and love. So when our emotions and our feelings are impacting our ability to do our daily activities, enjoy things and laugh, and have satisfying relationships with other people. That's when we're going to be thinking about whether this is a mental health issue or not. So I bet you're thinking you already know a lot about mental health, and that's great. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause our video, and I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to test that theory that you know everything by going to this website at the bottom. It's sporkle.com/games/4hraines/mental health true or false. Or you can just go to sporkle.com and search for mental health true or false. It's a 10-minute game, and it's going to ask you several questions about mental health, and you just have to determine if they're true or if they're false. If you can't get the website to work, then in the folder you will also find a paper copy of this game that you can test yourself, and we'll go through the answers here in a minute. So pause your video right now, and I will get back in just a second. All right, so I assume that you did pause your video and you went and played the game, or filled out the paper version of the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down all the answers and kind of talk a little bit about the different aspects of mental health just in general, and then we'll think about how that impacts our camping experience. So having a positive mental health means that you will not feel stressed or unhappy. That is definitely false. You are a human being. Your campers are human beings. They're going to feel stressed. We're all going to feel unhappy at times. We're all going to feel angry. We're all going to feel happy. We're all going to feel elated or excited. Being a human means that you're going to experience the entire range of human emotion, and that does include feeling stressed and unhappy. But when you have those feelings of stress or unhappiness or worry that affect your ability to live, laugh, and love, that is when we're going to be thinking about it being a mental health issue. When you have these feelings of stress, unhappiness, and worry that last for longer than a period of 3 weeks, that's when we're going to start thinking this could be more than just normal human emotion. It could be that I'm experiencing a mental health issue. Over 50% of mental health disorders appear by age 14. This seems like a young number, but it is actually true. So 50% of people who will receive a mental health diagnosis will experience signs and symptoms by the time they're 14 years old. This doesn't mean they're diagnosed when they're 14. It just means that they're having some of the signs or some of the effects already taking place. So a lot of our campers are younger than 14, but that doesn't mean that they haven't experienced this or it isn't something that is developing in them. 1 in every 5 American adolescents is living with a mental illness. So it's true, I guess. And what I mean by that is it is true 1 in every 5 American adolescents could be living with a mental illness. However, That statistic is only based on youth who have received a diagnosis. And to receive a diagnosis, you have to realize there's a problem. You have to tell an adult about that problem. You have to get connected to a resource that could be a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a psychologist, a counselor, but you have to seek out that resource. And then you have to see that professional enough times that they actually give you a diagnosis. So that's a lot of steps. There are a lot of people that never follow all the way through with all of those steps to receive a diagnosis. So 1 in 5 American teens is diagnosed, but in all likelihood, it's much closer that probably every 1 in every 3 or every 4 American teens is living with a mental illness. Depression is the most common mental health disorder among youth ages 12 to 17. And this is actually false. A lot of times we see in the media, especially movies and TV shows, that depression is the most common among teens. It's definitely the most visible in our media, but it's not true. The most common mental health disorder among our teens is anxiety disorders. So of that 1 in 5 that receives a diagnosis, about 31% have some type of anxiety disorder. And when you compare that to depression, depression has about 17% of that 1 in 5. So depression is number 2, but anxiety disorders are number 1. So anxiety disorders can have physical symptoms that mimic a heart attack, and this is true. So when someone is experiencing a panic attack, some of the things that they will often complain of is shortness of breath, pounding, heartbeat, tingling, especially in their arms and their extremities. They might be really, really cold really fast or have a hard time breathing. And these are all signs that could also show that someone is experiencing some type of heart attack or heart failure. So if you do have a camper who is experiencing those symptoms, we want to treat this like it is a heart attack, because the time that it takes to get that treatment has to be really fast for a heart attack. So unless they know that they've had panic or anxiety attacks in the past and that that's what they're experiencing, we're going to first treat the physical symptoms like a heart attack. The difference between typical sadness and depression is that people with depression have thoughts of suicide and death. And this is kind of a trick question, but it's not true. The difference between typical sadness and depression is that length of time. So as we said before, it's normal for a person to experience sadness or for a person to want to withdraw once in a while and have time alone. But it is when those symptoms or those emotions last longer than 3 weeks and they impact our ability to live, laugh, and love, that we're talking about depression or a possible depression diagnosis. People with depression do not always have thoughts of death and suicide, and lots of people who do not have depression do experience thoughts of death and suicide, so they don't go hand in hand. Substance abuse is considered a mental health disorder, and this is true. So substance misuse disorder is categorized in the DSM, which is the big book that doctors use to diagnose people. And so we want to look at substance use and abuse as the way that it changes our brain chemistry. So we do consider it a mental health disorder. Youth who live in poverty are at a higher risk for developing a mental health disorder. And if you think about what a youth who lives in poverty may experience, such as uncertainty or a lack of things that they may need, it makes sense that this is true. Just because they are at a higher risk, though, does not mean that they will develop a mental health disorder. Just like somebody who decides to smoke cigarettes, that doesn't automatically mean that they're going to have lung cancer, but it does put them at a much higher risk. Youth who have divorced parents are not at a higher risk than youth whose parents are married. Again, this is not saying that every youth who has divorced parents is at a high risk that they will get it. But if you have divorced parents, you are at a higher risk. So it's not true that parents who are divorced, if your parents are divorced, you are not at a higher risk. That is not true. You actually are at a higher risk if your parents are divorced. People with mental health disorders often face discrimination. This is true. So when we think about discrimination, we usually think about race or sexual identity or gender, but people who have mental health disorders also face discrimination. And this could be one of the reasons why many people decide not to seek treatment or to get a diagnosis, because they fear that that discrimination will impact their lives. Homesickness is a mental health disorder. No, it is not a diagnosable mental health disorder. We will have many campers in your counseling experience who may experience homelessness, or not homelessness, homesickness, but that does not mean that they have a mental health disorder. The signs of homesickness are similar to those of anxiety and/or depression. That, however, is true. So the signs of homesickness that you can think of, such as withdrawal, not participating in activities, not wanting to be around other people, maybe crying, maybe not eating, those are all signs and symptoms of a possible anxiety or depression diagnosis as well. So why is homesickness not a mental health disorder then? Again, it's because of that length of time. So it's not going to be a 3-week period, and hopefully, even though it may temporarily impact their ability to live, laugh, and love, hopefully all of your campers who experience missing home will also find enjoyment throughout the day at camp. And that's our goal with helping kids through that missing home stage. So you're most likely going to interact with campers who are living with a mental health disorder. If 1 in every 5 American teens is experiencing a mental health disorder, then we can infer that there's plenty of campers and even other camp counselors that you're working with who may be experiencing these things. So here are some things that I want you to think about. How will you know if a camper is experiencing a mental health problem? Well, unless they have that disclosed on their health form, we're probably not going to know that they experience a mental health disorder or a problem. So we are going to have to assume that everyone is dealing with something that they are carrying to camp from home. That doesn't mean it is a mental health disorder, but showing empathy and support to everyone is going to be a good way to support those campers who are experiencing a mental health disorder as well. What kinds of mental health disorders do you think you will encounter the most at camp? So at camp, you may encounter someone who has panic attacks, anxiety attacks. You may have some campers who experience ADHD or ADD or some other behavioral disorders. Missing home is not a mental health disorder, but you will definitely have homesick campers that you can help feel more safe and secure at camp. And how can you make sure that camp feels safe and inviting to all? And that, again, is where that role of empathy really plays a big part. So if you try to seek to understand and listen to everyone and to show everyone that they are welcome, then you can make sure that everyone feels safe at camp. That last question is something that you may want to bring up with your camp director when we get back to face-to-face meetings, and you can really discuss what strategies you can take to make sure that everyone, regardless of their mental health status, feels safe and happy to be at camp. So let's take a look at a couple scenarios. A camper is sitting out of dancing and tells you that they have a headache. You take them to fill up their water bottle, sit with them while they drink it, and explain to them why it's important to stay hydrated and how drinking water will help them prevent headaches. That's all about their physical health. Scenario number 2, you're about to leave for a hike up the big hill back to the high ropes course. But before you leave, you notice one camper still has on sandals instead of tennis shoes. We know this is a no-no at camp. So what will you do? Well, you'll probably explain to that camper why wearing closed-toed shoes is important, because if you get a foot injury at camp, it pretty much ruins the whole rest of the week. So then you'll ask that camper to please go change into the proper shoes. But what about this third scenario? A camper in your cabin seems to be withdrawn from the group. She isn't engaging in the cabin games, and you haven't really noticed her talking to anyone else either. What's the solution there? Well, do we know if this camper has a mental health problem? No. This camper could be experiencing missing home. They could be having some anxiety about a new surrounding area, or anxiety about staying in a cabin with lots of other people. We don't exactly know what's going on to cause that behavior and those emotions. But does it matter if we know the cause? No. The solutions can still be the same. So think about this for a second. How would you interact with this camper to make them feel safe and invited at camp? Some of the things you might have thought about were making sure that they feel welcome in your cabin by talking to them, by inviting them to do activities with you, maybe giving them a special job that makes them feel like they are a part of the group. You might want to make sure that you tell other people that are camp counselors or on your adult staff that you are a little concerned about this person, and make sure that you do all the things you would do if you knew for sure that someone was homesick. So making sure they're included, introducing them to new people, finding that activity that they can really look forward to next and focus on that instead of what they're missing. So those are some of the strategies you can take, even if you're not sure if it's a mental health disorder. So let's think about mental health in camp. These are the 3 questions that I would like you to answer and share with your camp director or 4-H educator. Now that you know a little bit more about mental health, how will you apply that knowledge to your role as a camp counselor? We already know we're going to keep kids safe and healthy at camp. From bug spray to sunscreen to closed-toed shoes, those are the things that you have already prepared for as a camp counselor. How are you going to prepare for that feeling of safety when it comes to mental health issues? Are there parts of your camp that may be more difficult for those living with a mental health disorder? And how can you improve those parts of camp to make everyone feel welcome? And then lastly, think about how has your perspective of mental health changed after this lesson? Or how will you change what you do as a camp counselor now that you are keeping mental health in mind? If you ever have any questions about being a camp counselor and dealing with mental health issues, please reach out to me, Raines, RAINES.74 at osu.edu. I hope you found this training to be helpful, and I'm really glad that you are a camp counselor for Ohio 4-H.